Hi, Fiona here. How Pakistan stopped a US-Iran war in 72 hours, 72 hours. That's all the time that stood between the Middle East and the most catastrophic war of the 21st century. On one side, the full military might of the United States. On the other, a nation of 90 million people that had been told, in plain language, it was about to be wiped off the map. The clock was running, the warplanes were ready, the missiles were already in the air, and the world held its breath. But what almost no one was watching was a small team of diplomats working through the night in Islamabad, making phone calls that would change history. And in the next 8 minutes, you'll find out exactly why. To understand what happened, you need to go back to where this crisis truly began. For decades, the United States and Iran have existed in a state of cold, smoldering hostility. Sanctions, proxy conflicts, assassinations, accusations. The two nations have never fully gone to war, but they have never truly been at peace either. Iran's nuclear program sits at the center of every dispute. Washington sees it as an existential threat to the region. Tehran sees it as its sovereign right. Neither side has ever blinked first. Then Donald Trump returns to the White House, and everything accelerates. His administration issues an ultimatum to Iran: dismantle your nuclear capabilities or face consequences. Not diplomatic language, not carefully worded policy, a direct public threat, timed, specific, and backed by the most powerful military on earth. Iran's response is defiance. Their commanders go on television. Their streets fill with protesters. Their missiles go on standby. The deadline is set. The world is suddenly staring into an abyss. Pakistan watches all of this from a uniquely dangerous position. It shares a long and complicated border with Iran. It has deep economic ties with the Gulf states. It has a strategic partnership with China, and it has a fragile, sometimes tense relationship with the United States. A war between Washington and Tehran would not stay contained. The shockwaves would travel through every corner of the Islamic world, and Pakistan would feel them all. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif makes a decision not to watch, not to issue a statement of concern from the sidelines, but to act. He picks up the phone and calls Tehran. Then Washington, then Tehran again. He is not a superpower. He does not have an aircraft carrier or a seat on the UN Security Council veto. What he has is trust, a rare currency in international diplomacy, and he is prepared to spend every last bit of it. But then everything changed. The Pakistani diplomatic team arrives in Islamabad's foreign ministry and begins what officials later describe as the most intense 72 hours in the country's modern diplomatic history. They are not negotiating a trade deal. They are not mediating a border dispute. They are trying to stop two nuclear-armed civilizations from colliding. The pressure is almost unimaginable. The first challenge is simple and brutal. Neither side trusts the other. Iran has watched America tear up agreements before. The JCPOA, the landmark nuclear deal signed in 2015, was abandoned by Trump in his first term. For Iranian leadership, a promise from Washington is not a promise, it is a pause. And pauses end. American officials, meanwhile, see Iran as a state that funds proxy militias from Yemen to Lebanon, that has threatened American allies, and that cannot be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon under any circumstances. These are not positions designed for compromise. They are walls. Pakistan's diplomats begin building a bridge anyway. The proposal they construct is not simple. It is a 10-point framework. Carefully worded, deliberately ambiguous in some places, deliberately precise in others. It addresses Iran's core demand to be treated as a sovereign nation with legitimate security interests. It addresses America's core demand, verifiable limitations on nuclear development, and it includes something no one expected: a request to Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which nearly 20% of the world's oil flows, as a goodwill gesture for 2 weeks. The Strait of Hormuz gambit is genius. It gives Iran something to offer without surrendering anything permanent. It gives Trump something to point to: a visible, concrete economic gesture that he can present to his base as a win. And it keeps the global oil markets from panicking while negotiations continue. No one had proposed it before. Pakistan does it in the middle of the night, between urgent phone calls, without any guarantee it will be accepted. What happened next shocked the world. Trump posts on Truth Social. The lines go out through Reuters. He is suspending the bombing campaign. He is calling it a double-sided ceasefire. He describes the Pakistani framework as a workable basis for negotiation. And then, the phrase that stops every newsroom on earth, he says the United States is very far along with a definitive agreement for long-term peace with Iran. The word definitive lands like a thunderbolt. This is not Trump hedging. This is not diplomatic softening. He is using the language of finality, of resolution, of something real. Analysts who have spent careers studying US-Iran relations go quiet for a moment, because this is not language anyone expected to hear. Not now, not from this administration, not after the rhetoric of the previous weeks. But the danger is not over, not even close. Even as Trump's post circulates, Iranian military commanders on the ground have not received updated orders. The missiles already launched toward Israel do not stop mid-flight, because a president posts on social media. The Israeli military announces it has detected incoming launches from Iranian territory. The situation is still live, still lethal. The ceasefire exists in words, not yet in the air, not yet on the ground. In Tehran, officials read Trump's statement once, then again. Analysts pore over every sentence, looking for the trap. Because Iran's leadership believes, with some justification, that deals with Washington can evaporate. They have seen Gaza. They have seen Lebanon. They have watched ceasefires become pretexts for continued assault. They are not going to celebrate a tweet. Not yet. But something is shifting. The tone in Tehran changes, just slightly. The language of only war begins slowly to make room for the language of readiness for peace. Senior Iranian officials begin to read the 10-point framework with something other than immediate rejection. The Pakistani channel, quiet, persistent, built on relationships cultivated over years, is holding. The next hours are the most dangerous. The ceasefire is not yet mutual. The missiles are still moving. Israel's position remains unclear, and reports suggest that Tel Aviv has been quietly pushing Washington to hold the line, to not agree to any deal. Israel sees Iranian military capability as an existential threat. A negotiated peace between Washington and Tehran without Israeli input is not something the Israeli government welcomes. This is the variable that no one fully controls, the one that could unravel everything in a single strike. And yet, the killing stops, slowly, incompletely, but it stops. The consequences of these 72 hours will be studied for generations. Pakistan, a country often dismissed in Western foreign policy circles as a secondary actor, steps into the center of history and holds a line that no one else could reach. The role of mediators, often invisible, rarely celebrated, is suddenly impossible to ignore. Without back-channel diplomacy, without trusted intermediaries willing to work without credit, this story ends differently, catastrophically differently. The Strait of Hormuz remains open. Oil markets stabilize. The bombs do not fall. The power grids of Iran are not plunged into darkness. And two nations that were hours away from a war neither truly wanted find themselves, improbably, at the beginning of a conversation. The lesson here is not that diplomacy always works. History proves it often doesn't. The lesson is that it only works when someone is willing to try, when a leader decides that the risk of failure is worth taking, because the cost of doing nothing is worse. Shehbaz Sharif made that bet. His diplomats made it with him. And the world, for now, is still in one piece because of it. What does this tell us about how wars really end, and who actually stops them? Leave your answer in the comments below. If you want more untold stories like this, subscribe, because history is never what they teach you in school.